The Myst series tells the story of Atreus, his family, his people, and that of the stranger that comes to his aid when he needs it the most. But the stars of the show aren't the puzzles, or even the narrative, including the extensive writing done to provide context and clues. No, the focal point of every Myst game are the Ages, the wondrous places we visit, where the puzzles are held, where the documents can be found and through which we get ever closer to the hidden truths in the tale and whichever moral choice awaits us at journey's end. Let's talk about the Ages. Most Ages are the works of one or more members of the Dunny people. They wrote two kinds of books for every age. The first is the most important, the descriptive book. It defines the age and provides the main link to it, the core link, so to speak. The second kind of book is the linking book, which simply holds a link to the age described in the descriptive book. Thus, descriptive books are best kept safe, while you just handle linking books. The vast majority of books we encounter in the Myst games are linking books. When the user travels, the book stays behind. Some linking books are traps, prisons, containing the people foolish enough to use them to travel, until another fool tries to do the same, at which point the original prisoner escapes. But what is an age? At a simple glance, from a mechanical point of view, it's simply another level. It's a small self-contained map you explore and collect stuff in, and use clues to solve puzzles. From an in-universe perspective, from the writings of the Dunny, an age is not just a place. Myst is not just the island. Myst is the entire universe in which the planet that holds the island is contained. With that in mind, it's possible to write new descriptive books that expand on an age, add new places to it. This in fact is seen across the series with the Dunny Age, which apparently is Earth, revealed as such in Uru. I'm not a fan of this, don't like it, but that's not the point here. Dunny is Earth, but there are two ages we link to that are part of Dunny, those being Tomahna, written by Atreus, and Kavir, a much older age from before the fall of the Dunny. Who created Dunny? Well, one of the first of those people, part of another group of refugees escaping some form of danger. In fact, Dunny means, in their tongue, something like new beginning. One thing to mention before we go any further is that there are two different perspectives regarding the writing of ages. The first one is that the writer creates the universe when he sets it down to a book. The second one is that these places already exist, and the only thing the writer does is alter them and then create a link. There's a lot of Dunny philosophy and cosmology tied to the second one. To sum it up as much as I can, every world exists on the branches of the Dunny equivalent of the Yggdrasil, a world tree. All the worlds already exist among its branches, and when you write an age, you simply create a split in the branch, a different version of the same world, one with all the changes you made. I suppose this is why it's called an age, as it is, in essence, a diverging timeline where you altered parts of the world, and so it develops differently. In terms of age creation, in Myst 3, Atreus sets down the principles behind writing a proper age, based on four core concepts: nature, energy, dynamic forces, and balance. The principles are: nature encourages a mutual dependence. This basically represents the cycle of nature. One thing feeds another. Death fuels regrowth and replenishment, for example. Energy powers future motion. Energy is heat, electricity, and all forms of natural power that become the spark of life and growth. Dynamic forces spur changes, to allow room for sudden changes in an age. If an age leans too heavily on energy, it's volatile and will have too many periods of upheaval. If it leans too heavily towards nature, then it can become intolerant to change. Thus, this principle is about creating the space for things to change from one to the other. Last one is balanced systems stimulate civilizations. This is a principle that encompasses the previous three. It's basically about making sure the other three are in balance. The principle of dynamic forces already kind of governs change to preserve balance between energy and nature. But that then too needs to be balanced enough that those periods of change are measured and controlled enough to allow for the birth of civilizations. You may be thinking this principle is redundant, or even pointless perhaps, but it's kind of the core design principle. Make it so energy and nature in the age are not so strong that they need course correction of dynamic forces so frequently that the age is too harsh a place for inhabitants to live and thrive. Though there is a second aspect of this principle, and it's how civilizations themselves can be the balancing force in an age. Narayan is the perfect example, but we'll get to that age later. Now, let's talk about the individual ages visited during the events portrayed in the Myst game. For the record, this will not take into account the events of Uru, but only the mainline Myst titles. Let's kick it off with perhaps the most important age of all, Myst. It's the core age for its game, and it's referenced across the series, and even makes a startling return in Myst 5. This age wasn't created by Atreus, but was made for him by his grandmother, Tiana, as a home and refuge from Atreus' father Gen, who's a cruel tyrant. Eventually, Atreus and Catherine, his wife, would trap Gen in the Age of Riven, Catherine's homeworld, and drop the linking book to Myst in a rift in space, which is how the book comes to be found by the stranger, the player. Atreus and Catherine raised their sons, Sirrus and Achenar, on Myst, and they eventually turned evil, tricked Catherine to travel into Riven, where she became trapped and then imprisoned by Gen, and modified the linking book to Kavir on Dunny so that it would become a prison for their father. Unfortunately for them, Atreus had left a couple of linking books behind that were actually traps for the greedy, and his two greedy idiot sons thought that all his warnings about those books were just lies to keep them away from riches and pleasures. So they found those books and became trapped themselves. And then we come in and help Atreus escape in the canon ending. Alternatively, you could free one of the brothers, but I wouldn't recommend it. Personally, I find the notion that this age was built for Catherine and Atreus to raise their family a bit strange, given that Myst, as portrayed in the games, doesn't have a single thing that could even remotely pass for a dwelling. The library has a tower and observatory, there's a ship docked somewhere, a small power plant, a clock tower, and a small hut with a pressure valve. The space under the giant tree log, where the linking book to Channelwood is, could be big enough for house a living space, but it's also a bunch of boards on stilts, so not exactly what I'd call living conditions. And this is very odd considering every other age you visit in the game has living quarters. Why not the homeworld? Having said so, Richard Watson, aka Dr. Watson, programmer for Myst and Riven, has said that the real Myst is far larger than the one we see in the game, that their imagined version of the island had to be cut down for mechanical purposes, and technological limitation, I suppose. But then, if you look at the fiction they wrote, like the Book of Atreus, the island appears exactly as it is in the game, though who knows. And apparently their quarters were underground, accessible through the elevator in the library tower. But none of that appears in the games, so it still feels weird to me. Myst serves as the hub world, from which the player travels to 5 ages. 4 in the main story and 1 additional age as a post-game thing. Mechanical Age, Stoneship, Selenitic Age, Channelwood, and Rime. Mechanical Age. When you visit it, it's a metal platform out at sea with a retractable bridge and controls to rotate said bridge to connect to other small platforms. Inside, the only other thing you find are the rooms Sirrus and Achenar kinda built for themselves. Sirrus favoring opulence, art, and antiques, and Achenar having weapons, traps, some tribal-style art, and of course, a secret room where he tortured and maimed his victims. The two brothers had very distinct appetites. The age was thrown home to a group of people suffering under the raids of a crew of pirates. With the help of Atreus and his sons, when they were still young and not evil, Atreus built a fortress that would withstand any assault, and in fact saw the pirates retreat as their attack failed time and time again. When you visit this age, it's after Sirrus and Achenar's imprisonment, at a time when they had already plundered the age for all it had and killed everyone. There is in fact something of an Easter egg where you can align the platform in a way you can see the skeleton of a pirate hanging in the distance. Finding these empty ages is the norm in Myst, and yes, the implication is that Sirrus and Achenar had their fill of their particular proclivities. Stoneship gets its name from an experiment Achenar made in adding new objects to an established age. He added a ship, and when he linked in, he found that it had manifested, but around the giant boulder, thus it was cracked in two. Stoneship was one of the first ages where Achenar saw life, and the inhabitants he met were very much akin to Peter Pan and the Lost Boys, young kids that found themselves out in sea, climbed on a rock, and learned to survive. There was one at first, then another joined in, and then a third, and then Achenar came to spend time with them. He left for a time and returned when the three were already adults, with their own kids and full lives. He promised to return when even more time had passed, to see how this civilization had progressed, but he wouldn't be able to for quite a while, as he would become trapped, as I mentioned before. Sirrus and Achenar, of course, came to this world. There, on this age, we can find two, let's call them captain's quarters. The one for Sirrus is lavish and decadent, with drawers full of gold and coins and gems. The one for Achenar is slightly simpler, a bit more Spartan, but has its own share of surprises, such as lamps made from rib cages. One can only hope he didn't use the locals for this. Selenitic Age. Achenar visited this one a few times, and every time, the place went through violent upheavals. Volcanic eruptions, strange winds, earthquakes. Achenar returned several times to this age to set up machinery to both measure all the violent forces, but also to explore the vast network of caves he found underground, which provided a wealth of raw materials. Selenitic Age, by virtue of being uninhabited, was spared Sirrus and Achenar's tender ministration. They didn't care for the age, so left it alone. Channelwood. Channelwood is an age with, primarily, tall trees growing out of the water. According to Achenar's notes, this age suffered a series of earthquakes that made the water level rise. That period of upheaval also nearly eradicated the human population of the age. The other sentient beings, a race of tree-dwelling ape-like people, viewed the remnants of humanity as gods, as their legends state that humans sacrificed themselves to stop the earthquakes and the destruction. Achenar witnessed this worship firsthand when he linked there and saw how they treated both him and an elderly man he met on the treetop villages. Sirrus and Achenar spent a good chunk of time on Channelwood, left there to explore and have fun with the locals, while their father went away on another expedition or did another experiment with the art. So when they turned evil, the young men returned to Channelwood and set up manors for themselves on the highest branches of the trees, and lorded over the locals as gods. Of course, power wasn't enough for Achenar and his bloodier appetites, so as you may expect, the locals became his prey, and on at least one of his many rooms across the ages, you can find the severed head of one of the tree people. Rime. Rime is an age Achenar wrote so he could run experiments with some curious crystals he acquired that seem to have similar properties to linking books. With the correct light spectrum applied to them, it was possible to view other ages. Rime is a frozen place, and Achenar and his boys, many years before they would turn dark, worked there, building their lodgings, laboratories, and machinery, with both children contributing to Achenar's projects and being one of the last times they would truly connect and have a loving relationship. The stranger is given the opportunity to visit Rime after the end of Myst. Achenar suggests we visit so we could see how his sons used to be, to perhaps show us that once upon a time they were not the monsters they grew into. For the record, I think a lot of Sirrus and Achenar's issues are the fault of their parents. Achenar is very much an absentee parent, and Catherine, for various reasons, suffered from nearly constant depression. They loved their boys but were perhaps not the best parents, but that's a topic for another time. Riven introduced the eponymous age, Catherine's homeworld. Riven was written by Gen, and much like his other ages, it eventually showed signs of collapse. Though Catherine and Achenar both did their best to adjust the age through the art after they left it. To be fair, Gen's art writing sucked. It was once, much like Myst Island, a single landmass, but by the time we visited in the game, it has broken down into several, but only one of them supports local life, that being the Jungle Island. which holds a Rivenese village. The other islands have been turned into workshops and quarries by Genn for his goal of creating new working linking books, as he was left stranded on Riven without any of the proper inks or tools to make the art feasible. He does eventually succeed and creates H233. Unlike Achenar, Tiana, or even Catherine, he doesn't give ages names, but simply numbers, and he doesn't view the inhabitants as people. To him, they're simply beneath him. Riven is by far the largest of the ages we visit across the Myst series, and much like the ages in the first game have different moods and technology and nature, so do the islands of Riven offer similar variety. As mentioned before, Jungle Island is a big patch of grass, so to speak, with a Rivenese village. Temple Island holds a large dome with Genn's massive machine that stabilizes the linking books he creates to H233. Prison Island was once Genn's home, but once he had the other one, he made it Catherine's prison. Crater Island is exactly what it sounds like, a giant crater with some walkways on the edges and a workshop. And Plateau Island, or Map Island, is where Genn more closely studied the decay of the age and has even a miniature representation of the islands of Riven. H233 is very much a barren landscape of rocks jutting out of water, with the biggest one of those spires holding Genn's home, from where he operates. It's also where we travel to confront Genn and deal with him. It's not really big, but does hold Genn's bedroom where we can find a holographic viewer with recordings of people important to Genn's life, his parents and his wife. High is the other age we visit in Riven. It's one of Genn's failed age experiments. He couldn't stabilize the viewport, the little window that shows the age and is used to link there. But Catherine found a way to do so, and through the art, helped the sage overcome the limitations and instabilities of Genn's sucky writing. This age became the headquarters of the Black Moiety, the Rivenese resistance, and when Riven finally collapsed at the end of the game, it became their new home. Tomahna is an age we first see in Myst 3 Exile and is the hub world for Myst 4. It's an age that Achenar wrote to be the new home for his family. It consists of a small oasis in a jagged rock canyon, with a river flowing through it, which Achenar built a dam for to help him power every device through hydroelectricity. This is where Yisha, his daughter, was born and where she was raised. In many ways, it represents a second chance for Achenar and his wife to raise a family and be safe from any turmoil or chaos or the danger of some blood relation coming after them. Unfortunately for them, things don't go to plan. In Myst 3 Exile, Brad Dourif plays Saavedro, a man whose world was brought to ruin by Sirrus and Achenar during that terror tour of theirs, where they went through every age they could and conquered, ransacked, and drove it to self-destruction. So this man has been through a lot, and is looking to make Achenar and his sons pay. But after discovering the fates of the sons, well, it's time for the father to pay for their sins. He takes the book of Releeshahn, we'll get to that one later, that Achenar has written and booknaps it, to draw him out, only it's the stranger that does the actual following. In Myst 4, we return to Tomahna many years later, and Yisha is a teenager, and things seem just fine. In fact, the reason we're here is because Catherine and Achenar have been discussing whether it's time to let Sirrus and Achenar free from their prisons, considering they may have repented and reformed. Well, they were half right, one of them did, but the other one kicks off another crisis. Jananin. This is a lesson world, one of 5 that Achenar created to serve as testing and teaching grounds for Sirrus and Achenar in their youth, so they could not just learn, but also truly understand and appreciate the principles behind the art, so they would know how it all worked before he actually taught them the ability. Jananin hides linking books to the other 3 lesson ages behind small challenges built around those age writing principles. This was Saavedro's prison for many years, where he plotted his revenge and understood not just the lessons Achenar tried to teach his sons, but also how to change things in those ages to remix the lessons, so that even if Achenar followed, he wouldn't just breeze through the puzzles, but have to explore them and find Saavedro's notes and hear his words condemning him. Edanna is the age that most represents the principle of nature. It's a self-contained island jungle with a whole lot of verticality. To progress through the island, the stranger has to make use of how different elements of nature interact with one another, how light affects certain plant and animal species, how stimulus can make something like an electric eel go zappy, and how electricity can in turn create a change in the environment. It's an age that exemplifies that codependence the principle speaks of. Voltaic, as its name might hint at, is the age of energy. It's abundant in two sources, water and lava. The goal of the lesson is to harness these raw sources and turn them into something useful. Hydroelectricity, pressurized steam, electromagnetism, all with the purpose of powering the door to a small bunker-like structure. The principle for energy states that it powers future motion, and this is seen represented in how getting the water wheel going with flowing water kicks everything else into gear, every device acting as the next step in a Rube Goldberg machine, culminating with riding a wind sail on a rail to the bunker structure. Amateria is the age of dynamic forces, though you could just consider the age of physics puzzles or just ball puzzles. All the puzzles are about balls of different materials, though crystal or ice seems to be the main material. There are puzzles around materials and weight, even harmonic frequencies, but much like the other ages, these are stepping stones, part of a bigger puzzle that can only be seen and understood once the component pieces are complete. Only difference is that with Amateria, you become part of the puzzle in the end. Your way out is to be encased in a crystal ball and sent through the railway system across the island, onto the ramps with counterweight and through the dangerous frequencies. Don't know if that part was the original design by Achenar or something added by Savito later on, but damn is it hardcore and kinda dizzying. Narayan, the heart of the matter in exile. Once upon a time, Narayan was a beautiful world, its people toiling incessantly in maintaining a great tree that was their home, which in turn protected them from dangerous spores in the air. It was something of a tenuous balance, but with the aid of the people, it persisted. And all in all, they were happy and thrived. This is Saavedra's home, and he once served as mentor and tutor to Sirrus and Achenar as they completed their lessons in the other ages. Achenar wanted them to see a world balanced by the presence of a civilization, and wanted them to learn from the Narayans, their customs, and their history. All was fine until the Terror Tour I mentioned. Sirrus and Achenar stopped by and, presenting themselves as gods, promised to liberate the Narayans from the burden of the tree so they could spend their days however they wished. This sparked disagreements, particularly between the younger generations and the older ones. Some embraced this possibility, some rejected it, and Sirrus and Achenar stoked the conflict until it broke out in civil war. Meanwhile, the two villains used the turmoil to make away with all the riches they could and, well, booked out. Saavedra followed them to ask them to help to fix things, but they just laughed and revealed they had no intention of ever fixing Narayan, and then left him to die in Jananan. He attempted to go back home, but the books linked to an observation platform that Achenar built, one with a barrier that keeps it separate from the rest of Narayan, and presumably the dangerous spores. It requires a complex password, and Saavedra simply didn't know it. But gazing through the barrier, he became convinced everyone was dead, and so his journey of revenge began. Spire is the red book we see in Myst, the prison age that Sirrus ended in. Achenar created the prison book with a trap. Anyone opening it would see untold riches in the viewport as a means of attracting the greedy. And of course, once he put his hand on the book, he found himself in this age, trapped in the caverns inside giant, jutting spires of some indestructible crystal. But Sirrus was nothing if not ingenious, and so in time he learned how to harness the natural forces, the storms, and the frequencies on which the different materials on Spire vibrated, and even found the specific frequency upon which they could detonate. And through all this work, his one goal was to claim his vengeance upon his father, and learning he had a sister didn't really change that. He felt no kinship and instead decided to use her innocence to advance his plans. He ultimately escaped and set in motion the events of Myst 4. Haven. If Spire was the perfect age for Sirrus to be imprisoned, a desolate place that required his brilliance to properly harness the different forces at play, then Haven is equally matched to Achenar's own pleasures and inclinations. It's a brutal jungle with different prey and predators. Achenar explored it thoroughly, at first indulging in the killing and the hunting, to the point that the local wildlife in the section of the jungle he lived in were terrified of him, running away at the mere sight of him. So he shifted his attention to another part of the jungle and found the creatures there, the more benign ones, were curious about him, and without aggression he formed a bond with them. Maybe because of this, or just the isolation, Achenar became more contemplative and was truly horrified by his own actions, at the thousands that died by his hands. He was elated to have a sister, and really connected with her. His relationship with his father was still contentious, but it was all going in a more positive direction. Then Myst 4 happens and, well, that's a story for another time. Serenia is an age written by Catherine, and like many of hers tend to be, they completely baffle Atris by being weird and completely unscientific. Case in point, Serenia has a society built around dreams. In fact, the Dreaming is an alternate space or dimension that the locals can travel into, but they can only do so in a safe way with the aid of a spirit guide, an elemental they bond with. This should be enough information for you to realize the many ways this age breaks Atris' rational brain. The core of Serenian society is the Memory Chamber, a structure that uses a special flower that harnesses the memories of the departed, holds them in the dream, but also returns the memories in some form of container for the living to keep. Yisha visited this age with her parents, learned their customs, and was even inducted into the Protectors, the guardians of the Memory Chamber. She was given a necklace that triggers on places with buried memories and retrieves them, allowing the user to listen to them. Sirrus and Achenar also visited Serenia in the past, and they plan to use the Memory Chamber to forcibly extract the knowledge of the art out of their father's mind and take it for themselves. And in Myst 4, after escaping, Sirrus attempts to restart the plan, only with another target in mind, a much less formidable one, Yisha. Kavir, as I mentioned before, is an age on Dunny, on Earth, an island in a cavern under the Earth. And yeah, there's a lot of islands in these games. It's my theory that Dunny only knew how to write islands. And also, mechanically speaking, islands are easier to deal with. Kavir is a place that Atris lived in for a while with his father, before the whole Riven thing happened and they parted in less than amicable ways. And after his sons tricked him, Kavir became his prison, stuck in a small set of rooms without the possibility of exploring the rest of the age, as it was blocked by a bunch of rocks. Eventually though, after the adventures of Myst and Riven, Atris would return and open the path to the rest of the complex. It's a key place in Myst 5, where the story begins and ends there, as it houses the tablet that is the core of the story, and once we reclaim it, it's on Kavir that we make the final choice on who gets it, the Cleft. The Cleft is a small set of caverns inside a dormant volcano in New Mexico, so they're in the Age of Dunny. It's the opening section for both Uru and Myst 5. The Cleft opens to a vast network of caverns, with a giant hole, aka the Great Shaft, with a gigantic elevator on it, which leads to different levels, most of them collapsed. There are also some rest areas that house the linking books to the next age, Direbo. Direbo is a small age, tiny in fact, a set of 4 mounds in a swamp, each of them having a linking book and also a strange bubble that holds a stone slate on a pedestal. This slate is connected to the tablet that is the MacGuffin of Myst 5, and also allow you to link to the different ages you visit in the game. These stone slates allow for the user to draw symbols on them, which in turn connect to other pedestals in these ages, allowing you to travel between them, and you can also use them to summon the Barrow, the indentured servitor race of the Dunny, and make them use their miraculous powers to alter the ages in some capacity, from making it rain to altering the passage of time itself. Direbo is the very definition of a hub world. It has nothing but gates to other realms. Tahgira is a frozen age, much like Rime, and it's the smallest of the Myst 5 ages. It's a giant glacier with a small outpost to harness steam from underground sources, though they seem to have frozen over in the time between the Age of the Dunny and now, as you require the Age of the Barrow to create a heat wave to generate steam once more and open the path to the final pedestal, which opens the Tahgira section of the lock on the final tablet. It's an age trapped in perpetual snow and very little of it is explorable, so there's not much to talk about. Noloben is the home of the Barrow, and of the Dunny survivor Escher, played by the late great David Ogden Stiers, who appears before you to provide a whole lot of exposition and a lot more bitterness towards the adult version of Yisha we meet in Myst 5, as well as Tiana and Atris and the entire family. Escher isn't exactly a great person, and it's really apparent in the way he refers to the Barrow. He made this H his home after the fall of Dunny, and used at least some of his time to experiment on the Barrow, to learn everything that made them tick. He is disgusted by them and makes no effort to conceal it. Todelmer is an age made with the express purpose of studying the stars, to understand the movement of celestial bodies across the cosmos. This age is locked perpetually at night, and even from the canyons that make up the explorable area, you can see a giant blue planet in the sky with a Saturn-like ring around it. In fact, you can make that ring move using the Barrow's power to control time, which is the best example of how powerful the Barrow truly are, and yet they continue to serve even after the fall of the Dunny. In truth, the tablet you're trying to unlock is what binds them to service. They really have no choice. Laki'ahn. No age better shows the decadent and casual evil that Dunny subjected the people of many different ages than Laki'ahn. It derives its name from the Laki, a set of shark-like creatures that make up this age. It was once inhabited by an indigenous tribe whose customs had them hunt the Laki as a rite of passage. So what did the Dunny do? They took over, created arenas, and put members of the tribe to fight the Laki for their own amusement. By the time we visit this world, the tribe is nowhere to be seen, likely extinct, and the Laki themselves give the island a wide berth, staying far away out at sea. There is only one more age to talk about, first mentioned in Myst 3, but not really seen until Myst 5, though saying seen is a stretch. You travel to it, but don't really get to explore it. You just witness the end of Myst 5 there, and the reunion of Yisha and Old Man Atris, and that is Releeshahn. Atris sought to restore the Dunny, and even found survivors across multiple ages, then gathered them to attempt to rebuild the old cities and the ancient civilization. But there was a lot of bad there, not just memories of the fall, but also the Dunny were not exactly good people. Turns out that when you can create or shape worlds, you can get a bit of a god complex. Who knew? So Atris proposed something else to the survivors, to leave the ruins behind, to leave the old Dunny behind and instead focus on a new beginning, just as the original Dunny had done. And Releeshahn was the age he wrote for them. Myst 3 focuses on the principles behind the writing of ages because Atris is struggling with the writing of this new age, and it's only after visiting some of his old ones, including the Selenitic age and even Myst and Rime, and with some wisdom from his wife, that he finally finishes the age. But we don't get to see it until the end of Myst 5, which is a damn shame. With this look at the ages, I hope you have a firmer grasp on the different worlds explored throughout the Myst series, and some of the events that transpired in them both prior and during our journey. Speaking of journeys, this is but the first stop in this retrospective of the Myst series. There is one more stop, and that is to speak of the man whose life, actions, and relations shape the events we take part in. Join me next time for the life, times, and maybe even crimes of the Atris family.